Hey everyone, this is Lauren Jenkins, and I am going to make my attempt to complete the screencast-o-matic discussing my physical technical exercise that was assigned to us in the last few weeks. All right, we're going to take a look at my rendition of the illustration of the social ecological framework borrowed from the 2010 Dietary Guidelines for Americans. As you can see, it's very similar to the one that's reflected within, if you look at the actual dietary guidelines for Americans. The emphasis that I really want to show are just the areas and factors that impact our decision-making process of what we eat, what we consume, as well as our physical activity. I believe what is being emphasized just kind of throughout the duration of this course that we've been taking, um, and I hope that I'm getting this right, Professor, is that although individual behavior change is critical, we look at a lot of individual factors. It's important for us to be able to expound upon that and recognize um, regarding the social ecological model that other social and cultural norms and values, sectors of influence, environmental settings, kind of that macro social level, not only impacts individual factors, but it affects us all. And so this is my basic stacked Venn diagram to reflect that. Let's look at each section real quick. So we see with social and cultural norms and values, we see that heritage eating patterns, actually in the 2010 guidelines, it actually talked about different ethnicities, cultures that were influenced based on locations and what they ate. Here on this page in the dietary guidelines, just to highlight it, where research actually took a look at different types of cultural dietary eating patterns. The Mediterranean diet, as well as the Japanese and Okinawan dietary patterns, and how it associated with lower risk for heart disease or certain things like that. So that is why for my I kind of just added a little more where it says eating patterns. We see that within social and cultural norms and values. The other thing was sectors of influence. We can see educational materials, marketing, media, government, and legislation. One of the things that was emphasized in the dietary guidelines is that they had a dietary guidelines advisory committee, of course, the Food and Drug Administration Modernization Act, healthcare systems, agriculture, business, industry, dealing with food, beverage, physical activity, and entertainment, um, are sectors of influence. And then environmental settings, where we live, not just whether you live, what type of home you live in, but specifically the settings, whether it was in a urban setting, rural setting, suburban area, also work. And I really appreciate a link that um, I received in regards to looking at the context of how work environments affect also and influence our food and beverage intake and physical activity. Learning, educational, what is accessible in terms of our food and beverage intake at our schools, recreation, other community settings, faith-based organizations, etc. So this was my attempt to illustrate the social ecological framework borrowed from the 2010 Dietary Guidelines for Americans. So now let's take a look at the the Venn diagram that hopefully will explain my final project. Right, so I have pulled up one of the three, kind of breaking down each area on the Venn diagram that I'm going to focus on. The three areas that we're going to look at are the social and cultural norms and values, the sectors of influence, and environmental settings regarding my project, which is titled Consumer's Choice, looking at making the right decision on appropriate dietary habits for pregnant women. I know throughout some of our Facebook discussions, and me expecting my first child, I am really interested about how society, cultures, sectors of influence, and environmental settings may influence the food and beverage intake of pregnant women. As mentioned in discussions as well, specifically regarding African American culture and the influence of the dietary guidelines in regards to such population, as well as within a culture where breastfeeding is, I guess, not the norm. And so just wanting to just kind of look into this and research it and get some more information. So let's look at the first section. We'll look at social and cultural norms and values. Um, in regards to uh, making the right decision on appropriate dietary habits for pregnant women, belief systems play a role. Eating patterns, again, we talked about different cultural backgrounds that influence the eating patterns, and also heritage, African American norms and values regarding like breastfeeding or pregnancy. And here was a link that our professor had provided me, and I added to the Venn diagram. Okay. Next, we're going to look at the sectors of influence that essentially impact the decision-making process of pregnant women making appropriate dietary decisions on their dietary habits. Some of the educational materials that I explored were from, even though it is a government agency, but the United States Department of Agriculture, in knowing what resources and education in terms of health to provide pregnant women. Also, the choosemyplate.gov in regards to pregnancy and breastfeeding. Also, the American Pregnancy Association provided a lot of training materials, educational materials too, which influence women who are pregnant and what they should eat. We know that market and media play a huge role in terms of the influence of our food and beverage intake, as well as government and legislation. And as I've listed, I listed the 2010 Dietary Guidelines for Americans. We have the WIC, Food and Nutrition Services, and then there is a link right there on the diagram. Okay. Finally, I looked at the areas in regards to environmental settings. Again, specifically, how does appropriate dietary habits for pregnant women in terms of them making the right decision change amongst community settings? So, like urban settings, rural settings versus suburbs. Also, workplaces, looking at work environments that are supportive of the needs of pregnant women or women who are breastfeeding, looking at typical 9 to 5 jobs, Monday through Friday jobs, versus shift work where it's ever changing. Also, the high demand, high stress positions. I currently work in the juvenile justice system. And so that was something I was interested in, knowing that a lot of times the correctional system is not a primary woman field. And so how are correctional institutions supporting the needs of women, but pregnant women? So environmental settings in regards to that. And then again, recreation facilities. And then let me move my box so you can see, talking about faith-based organizations. So that's another community setting. The reason I actually brought that up is, just thinking about, I guess, the time of March and April where you have certain faith-based organizations celebrating Lent, Daniel fasts, and I guess it's more of Christian religion, and definitely Easter. And also, I mean, other faith-based organizations where you see fasting and certain, uh, definitely observing certain holidays that actually dictate what type of dietary or foods that are permitted to eat during that holy time. So those were my areas that I covered, and that's about it. Have a good one.